Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. William J. Rothwell. My name is Layla Farzam, and I am the Alumni Ambassador for the Organization Development and Change program. We also have Jenny Lee with us today, who will be managing our chat feature. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact and ask questions for the Q&A segment. If for some reason you get disconnected from our presentation, please use the same Zoom link to re-enter. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you to prepare for implementing quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there's a Ph.D. program in workforce education and development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series from experts around the world. Today, we welcome Dr. Rothwell.
We had Dr. Rothwell for the first webinar in April, and we're happy to have him back for today's webinar. William J. Rothwell is Professor of Workforce Education and Development on the University Park campus of Penn State University. There he leads a graduate specialty in organization development. He had 20 years of full-time HR OD experience before arriving at Penn State in 1993. He has authored 112 books and served as consultant for 50 multinational companies. A frequent traveler, he has visited China 83 times since 1993. Welcome, Dr. Rothwell.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and thank you also for introducing the session, Layla. And I'm delighted to be with you today to talk about a topic that is critical for current events. I'm talking about the title, Building Trust, Transparency, and Authenticity. And of course, I've written many books on the topic of organization development. It is a key focus of my own research and my practice. And before I came to Penn State, I was, as Jenny mentioned, a full-time practitioner and was involved with many change efforts. Now, I'd like to begin with an opening poll. You don't have to answer this because that takes a lot of time, and I only have 45 minutes with you before our Q&A begins, and so I need to be focused. But I would ask you to reflect, and reflection, self-reflection is very important for managers and organization development practitioners today. How many of you feel that you understand the differences and similarities between values, ethics, and job performance? How many of you feel your actions every day are aligned with your own values? How many of you feel that your actions every day are aligned with your own ethical views? And how many of you feel your job performance is aligned with your values and ethics in everything you do and say? These are important issues to reflect on, and it is a topic of particular importance today. Now, I like to begin all my webinars with an agenda. Managers generally insist on an agenda because they don't want to waste a lot of time, and they want to be sure that the time is well used and is well focused. So in my brief presentation today, I'm going to talk about what do we mean by the terms trust, transparency, and authenticity. What are some ways to build trust, demonstrate transparency, and live by authenticity? And how are we able to reestablish trust when it has been lost? And these are important issues for today. In today's business world, in today's academic world, in today's public sector and government, and in nonprofits. So in this webinar, I'll be talking about a topic that is really important in organization development, and that is trust and its related topics of transparency and authenticity. And of course, trust, I define it as meaning that people do what is expected. Transparency means people are open in what they do, and they don't try to hide, distract, detract, deceive, deny, deflect, or conceal their motives or their actions. And authenticity is all about a person who is what you see is what you get. That person means what they say, and they say what they mean. So in today's session, we'll be talking about how do we establish trust, how do we achieve transparency, how does authenticity guide behavior, and what can we do to reestablish trust when it is lost. So there are some key objectives. Every good trainer has targets, and I'm no different. So today's simple objectives are to define these key terms, look at some models of trust, transparency, and authenticity that are practical and may help us make sense of these sometimes hard to understand terms, and talk about how we can examine how trust is lost and how we can restore it when that happens. Now, we've already mentioned our Master Professional Studies in OD and Change, but I wanted to not forget to give you a link that you can refer to if you have interest in this webinar, or you are interested in all topics related to organizational change. And by the way, the term corporate culture change was not coined by general managers. That was coined by the field of organization development. And it was stolen by business managers who wanted to find a way to talk about changing the attitudes, values, belief systems that are acted on in their organization. So that's really what OD is all about, a humanistic view of change, a bottom-up view where the people are involved in making decisions about issues that affect them. So let's move right into defining trust, transparency, and authenticity. And of course, I've already started to do that. But trust means people do what is expected of them. It has to do with reliability. We can be trusted to be reliable. We're credible. People believe us. They're assured that we have the ability to live up to what they think we should do. People have faith in us and confidence in us, and they don't basically think that we are bad people who will not do what we're supposed to do in whatever role it is that we happen to be enacting in the organization. Transparency means that people are open in what they do, and they don't try to hide what they're doing. They don't have hidden agendas. And I can tell you in my corporate experience, I once ran into a vice president in a major insurance company where I worked, and his managers were terrified of him. And when I asked them privately why they were terrified of him, they said that the guy always had a hidden agenda. He would tell them one thing or ask them to do something, but they could always count on the fact that there would be hidden reasons that they were unaware of for his requests. And it terrified them to think that they might be doing things for reasons that they were unaware of. So transparency is all about being open. In typical usage, we think transparency is associated with behavior that's easy for other people to see and interpret. There are many behaviors we see in our daily lives, and the question is, how do we interpret those? I mean, I'll give you a simple example. You're walking down the hall and your boss is coming from the other direction, and your boss doesn't even look at you. Your boss walks by you and does not say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever's appropriate. Your boss just ignores you. How do you interpret that behavior? In transparent situations, we believe people are acting in good faith. But transparency is all about interpreting what we see and believing that there is a clear match between what we see, and we don't have room to draw a lot of false interpretations based on our history with that person. So hidden agendas aren't there in a transparent person. They're open. They basically tell you what they feel, and you can believe that they're honest in what they say. Now, the fact is, in today's business world, a lot of issues are limited because of law, like employee privacy, as an example. If we fire a worker, the other workers may wonder why, but because of employee privacy laws, we cannot reveal the reasons why we may have terminated someone or transferred them or whatever. And if we do that, we may be sacrificing legal issues for transparency with workers. Some problems with transparency may result from the fact that decisions are not made quick enough. If we've been a manager, we know that sometimes when the company announces a major change or our organization announces a change, workers are desperate to know how they are personally affected. Am I going to be fired? Am I going to lose my pay raise? Am I not going to get the promotion that was pending for me? They're wondering all those things. And sometimes they don't realize that the transparency isn't there because the decisions have not yet been made. And so workers think that all decisions are suddenly made at the time of a company announcement, and we all know that isn't true. So there's a mismatch about how quick the rumor mill works versus the speed of management decision making. Gossip moves at lightning speed. Management decision making rivals molasses for slowness. And so we have that mismatch, and that can give rise to concerns that we are not being told the whole truth, that things are not being transparent. And then when I say on this slide, normal rules of social interaction, rarely do we want to tell people the blunt, tactless truth. If you're not doing your job right, managers may try to come up with tactful ways to say that, but it may come off as sounding like it isn't clear. And that's what I mean about rules of social interaction. In many cultures, we try to avoid conflict, and we may do that by concealing from people what we really feel. Authenticity is all about what you see is what you get. You know, can you believe that the person is telling you the truth and that people mean what they say and they say what they mean? You know, I'd be remiss in this talk if I didn't mention Jack Gibb. And he is deceased, but he is one of the grand old elders of the organization field. And his specialty was trust. And he wrote a famous book, and here's the cover, Trust, A New View of Personal and Organization Development. And he talked about his years of research and consulting work on the issue of trust. That was his key focus. So we know that when we lack trust, people have to waste a lot of time getting agreements in writing, or getting contracts, or getting protection through legal means, through unionized efforts, or by other means. So trust is important, because if we don't have it, we end up spending a lot of time covering our rear ends. A 2014 survey found that 87% of workers believe that trust was the single most important thing, and they could not trust their bosses. In the same survey, 91% of workers said that trust was essential in their work with a boss, but only 48% felt that they could really trust their supervisors. And so that's a problem. Why do we care about trust? Well, trust can lead to turnover. And we all know turnover is expensive. We have to waste a lot of time recruiting people and training them and onboarding them and worrying that they will leave and so forth. And another thing about lack of trust is that it provides a bad reputation for our organization in the labor market. And when people are saying bad things about your organization, it is that much more difficult to attract, develop, and retain superstar productive people. So we care about trust because the lack of it may cost us big time. And at the same time, you know, these days with the virus, many people have learned to prefer working from home. And there are many reasons why people like working from home. Just think about it. If you live in a big city, it's so much easier to work on your computer than have to get on some crowded suburban train into the inner city to work in some cramped office and deal with people and maybe catch the virus in the meantime. At the same time, we know that child care issues and elder care issues are growing problems. In the US, we don't have a good national system to deal with child care, and we don't have a good national system to deal with elderly people who are unable to take care of themselves. And sometimes that's the only solution for a worker, is to work from home so that they can do the double duty or even triple duty of taking care of their children and their parents. And so, but another reason why we might like to work from home is to get away from the water cooler crowd. Well, by that I mean the toxic workers who spread a lot of rumors and gossip. And you know, there are some people who just delight in creating conflict and drama. And if we work from home, it may be easier to get away from such people who make us feel bad. And so that's one of the reasons why people prefer to work from home. They have less interpersonal contact with obnoxious individuals who we call difficult employees. Symptoms that trust is lacking, as this slide indicates, people will do only the bare minimum because they're worried if they do more that someone might turn them in and they might be criticized or even disciplined. And it leads to a very small world. The person focuses on what they know they're supposed to do so that they don't get into trouble. They're worried that whatever they do might lead to complaints, finger pointing, scapegoating, and may lead them to run into trouble with their boss, their coworkers, or customers. So people in a situation or an environment or a corporate culture where trust is lacking, They will deliberately withhold information because they believe information is a form of protection. It gives them security. If they get fired, the organization's in big trouble because they have knowledge that is valuable. And so they worry that decision makers may say one thing but do another thing, believing that one set of rules apply to senior leaders, but an entirely different and stricter set of rules affect the workers. And so that leads to a distrusting workplace. And in those places where people don't trust what they're being told by their bosses, rumors are actually trusted more because they don't quite know who to trust. But if a rumor comes from a respected coworker, they may believe the bad news they hear in a rumor quicker than they believe the politically correct knowledge they hear from a boss. So management in an environment that does not inspire trust underscores and acts in ways that show that managers don't trust people. There's actually been research studies that say that managers use different body language and eye contact when they are lying to people, and that workers who have been trained on that body language can pick it up quickly, just like in the TV show Lie to Me. Some of you know that show, where the body language alone of a criminal would tip off the worker or the police that the person was not telling the truth. Well, we can spot that in many cultures. And an authoritarian leadership style is often what ends up happening in a corporate culture where trust is lacking, because that's the only way to get results, is to force people to do it. So in a corporate culture that's without trust, transparency, and authenticity, group members doubt what they're told by their bosses. They don't know what they're being told by the people they interact with. Basically, they don't know who to trust, when to trust them, and how much to trust them. And that leads to a scary and unpleasant work corporate culture. And we want to get away from that, of course. There has been research on modeling of what are the variables that affect trust. Here's a respectable article that has been done to research this topic, and you can see some of the factors that affect trust and some of the results that stem from it. People will act on what they believe is the level of trust that they are experiencing. So if they believe, for example, the company announces a downsizing, but no one is told who is affected, workers may believe that they are affected individually and personally, and that will lead them to start floating their resumes. So that will be an outcome if people don't trust what they are told, or if they are not told anything and they question the motives of the people who are talking to them. Transparency has a different model that helps us understand it, that shows the relationship between transparency, trust, and acceptance. In a transparent environment, we have an open book policy, an open door policy where you can call on your boss and you can believe what you are told. The boss will tell you the truth and has a track record of doing that. That's the kind of boss people want and the kind of corporate culture that they want. And in a trusting environment, we can ask follow-up questions to test the truthfulness of what we have been told. Just like we will sometimes ask a person in a job interview the same question in multiple ways so that we can test whether we are being told something that is true because it will come back as a consistent answer. Well, the same issue can be used in testing how much trust to put in someone. And how much do we accept the ideas we're given, the projects we're assigned to? How much do we trust our coworkers, our boss, our customers, the people we serve, our clients? How much do we trust the roles we've been assigned in the organization? They're all related. Authenticity has several variables that affect it. Being true to yourself, which is a key to organization development. Often we're told in the OD world that you are the instrument of change. And that goes to the old Mahatma Gandhi quote that you must be the change you wish to see in the world. If you want a better world, then you need to set the positive example and be the living embodiment of that positive change that you wish to see. And it starts by not tricking yourself and telling yourself lies. And it moves on to maintaining strict coherence between your own feelings and what you have to say or do. Does the company ask you to do things you don't believe is the right way to do things? And how do you respond in those situations? And then how do we make values-based choices? This is part of an authentic leader, is that they know what their values are and they know they can spot situations where their values are being questioned or situations where what they're being called on to do doesn't match up to what they personally believe. I've been playing with this model for some time, and you can see I'm trying to relate job performance, which is related to productivity. Job performance is all about what you do and the results you get. But values and ethics are not the same dimensions. They are factors that influence but are not identical to that job performance. So values are basically, what do we believe is important? What do we value the most? Do we value money, prestige, a good life, comfort, beauty, athletic ability? What is it we value the most? By the way, there are instruments to measure that. I'm particularly fond of the Rokich value survey, which gives you a way to assess the values of yourself or others. And then ethics. In many organizations today, codes of conduct are identified, but they're written by lawyers to basically protect the company legally against actions against it. They do not, those codes of conduct often do not deal with the routine day-to-day problems, ethical problems that may emerge in dealing with the business. If you want to explore issues having to do with trust, transparency, authenticity, values, or ethics, I'm personally fond of the critical incident approach. And if you're not familiar with that approach, it basically involves pulling stories from people who have a lot of work experience in a certain corporate culture, and then looking for the common patterns across those stories. And so we would ask questions like, tell me a story about a time when you felt a challenge in this organization and in your job about trust, transparency, authenticity, values, or ethics. What happened? When and where did it happen? What made this a challenge for you? What did you do in the situation, and what made you uncomfortable about it? And if you face the same situation again, would you do the same thing you did then, or would you handle it some other way? I've actually asked these questions in several organizations, and I've come up with answers after doing the analysis of the common themes. I've come up with answers that completely shocked the senior executive team because they had no idea that some of the issues that were coming up actually happened in their own organizations. And so it can be a way to surface the ethical value issues that come up in an organization and then mount effective action plans to address those issues. So how do we go about building trust, transparency, and authenticity? Well, there's no shortcut. Trust is based on our experience. So we learn to trust someone through our experience with them. And if we've had no experience with them, we may need to rely on things like written evidence, a signed contract, or a letter of agreement where the person puts in writing what they are doing. And of course, that's particularly important. If we don't trust the organization, we probably won't trust the people we are dealing with the first time we meet them because we know they're coming from a criminal organization. Think about marriage. In marriage, it's all based on trust. If your partner has a love affair after they have pledged to be true to you for their entire lifetime, if you love the person, you may forgive them, but you will never trust them again because they've already given you evidence that they're willing to break their promises. And so we must be careful about losing trust. In some cultures, I've spent a lot of time in China, as Jenny mentioned at the beginning of the talk. In the US, we often trust people based on written contracts. And when they violate the contract, we sue them. And that's how we ensure trust in some business dealings. In China and Asian culture, often it's a little different. I've spent many meetings in China over dinner, and they build a personal relationship with the business partner before they put anything in writing. They want to see that you're a trustworthy human being. And that's often the way business is done in some other cultures. So how can we establish transparency? Well, you pledge that you will be open to other people, and then you live that. But if people find that you violated that by hiding a hidden agenda from them or by lying to them, then again, transparency and faith in people is lost. And once it's lost, it's very difficult to restore it. The best way to show authenticity is to live it, to role model it, to show people that you say what you mean and you mean what you say. Of course, we have to be careful about what we tell people and how we tell them. We can choose to be tactful and be sensitive to people's feelings rather than bluntly telling them what we think or what we know. As an example, think of the situation, and it comes up in some workplaces frequently, where the worker comes to work with body odor, and they stink so much they knock over their coworkers. How does their boss deal with that situation? Well, one way, of course, would be to call the worker into the office and say, "You stink, go home." But that is very hurtful. And so we may come up with other ways to say that in a more friendly way that will get the meaning across, but will not be so tactless. And we do have to worry about that in dealing with authenticity issues. Now, I'm giving you an instrument as part of today's session, and I believe Jenny is going to help me pull that up just briefly, you don't have to do it. Are you pulling that up in the chat box, Jenny?
Yes, I shared the link in the chat box.
So if you'd like to look at it, I'm not going to ask you to do it because we don't have the time, but I would like you to have that tool so that you can assess trust and do some reflection on the level of trust in your own organization. So I'm going to move on, but that's a tool that you can take, and feel free to use it. You won't violate any copyrights or anything if you use that. It's something to pass out in a meeting to test how things are. So you can reflect on it. Do you feel the instrument is a good way to measure trust, transparency, and authenticity? If you do, could it help you identify some areas for improvement? You could hand it out in a business meeting to your workers, to your staff, have them complete it, turn it in. Don't do any handwriting analysis, simply calculate the scores and then feed it back as a point to identify the areas for action in the future. I'd like to turn to how do we reestablish trust once it is lost? And you'll see from the graphic, trust is like a paper that once crumpled, it can't be perfect again. We can straighten it out, we can iron it, but it's very difficult to restore trust once it's lost. So what can we do about that? I want you to think about, how does a person or an organization reestablish trust once it's lost? You can use your chat box and type in some thoughts there if you would like. I'll give you a moment to do that. Again, I'm asking you to type into your chat box, your answer to, how does a person or an organization reestablish trust once it is lost? I'll give you just a moment for that. Not seeing many comments there. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Oh, here it is. People said things like take time with workers, keep being honest, follow through on commitments, try listening, hire new leadership. Those are all good solutions. Let's move on. So the fastest way to reestablish trust once it's lost is to fire the person who has violated that trust level. And that may include the CEO, or it may include even the entire senior executive team. Has that happened in organizations? Absolutely. There are many examples of where the CEO was fired or went to prison even as a result of lying to people. And in some cases, that also broke the law, in addition to being bad faith and bad management. But today, a lot of times, organizations want to change the company by changing leadership. And the view is that if we can change our CEO, we can get a new senior executive, maybe we will change the corporate culture. Well, I will tell you, the research says 70% of CEOs brought in from the outside to make a major strategic change end up failing. And they fail for the simple reason that quite often their efforts are blocked by the people immediately below them, the C-suite, the vice president level, unless that group is also replaced. And there's now a new code word or code phrase for that. We call it transition management. So instead of firing our CEO, we fire our entire senior executive team and field a replacement team. You can imagine the upheaval that creates in an organization, because basically none of the senior leaders are from the organization, and they have to get up to speed quick on the business issues and in working together. Incidentally, there are consulting companies that specialize in dealing with those situations. Another way to deal with restoring trust once lost is scapegoating. Find someone to blame and then fire them. That's a role played by some consultants. The company hires a consultant, implements an unpleasant change, then fires the consulting team and scapegoats them and says, there you go, we've fixed the problem, and the people who gave us the pain are now gone. Am I advocating that? No, I'm just telling you it is an approach, though not a pleasant one. There are other ways that you mentioned in your chat box about other ways to reestablish trust. A slower way is to reprove yourself. But again, it's very likely no one will trust you, even though they may be willing to work with you. They will probably check and view with suspicion things that you recommend or talk about. When decision makers are shown that they're not being transparent, what do you do as a worker or manager? What's your choices? Well, often we'd like to say fire them, but if the person who violates that trust is our boss, we can't exactly do that. So what do? We may have to look for another opportunity by floating our resume. And if we're really brave, we may spell out in our letter of resignation why we're leaving. Of course, recognize that may cost you dearly in future recommendations from that particular employer. So long experience where you role model the right way may be the only way to overcome problems with authenticity. So I've covered a lot of territory in today's talk. I bet some of you are somewhat amazed that I was able to get through so many slides in such a short period of time. So I'd like to summarize and then turn to some questions and answers. So you should now be able to tell us what is meant by the definitions of such terms as trust, transparency, and authenticity. I shared with you research-based models of trust, of transparency, and of authenticity. And we discussed some ways to deal with what to do when the trust is lost and how we may be able to restore it. You know, I gave a talk similar to this outside the US, and many hands went up in the audience, and people told me when I was talking about transition management that their own company had gone through a replacement of the entire senior executive team. So we know that that is actually happening. That is not a pure theoretical approach. In fact, that is one solution to dealing with some of the problems we have with company performance. If we want the whole organization to change quickly, one solution is to plug and play an entirely new senior executive team. So now I would like to shift to questions and answers, and I will ask Jenny to help facilitate this discussion. I don't know if we have any questions or what. I'm going to look in the Q&A box.
Yes, now we are having a Q&A session. One of the questions is there a positive correlation between organization authenticity and employee satisfaction with their boss?
Yes, but I have not I've not done a specific research literature review on that topic, but in recent years, there has been much attention around the issues of trust, authenticity, and transparency because of the many ethical problems organizations have been facing. You might have heard the statistic, and it's true, that every Fortune 500 company has had at least one major ethical scandal within the last 10 years. And some of them have had many such scandals. And this is why the average time for a CEO to spend in their jobs today is 19 months in Asia Pacific and 27 months average in the rest of the world. And that's significant because how long does it take to install a major corporate culture change in a very large multinational company? I said 19 months in Asia Pacific and 27 months in the rest of the world as the average time for a CEO to be in his or her job. Well, the answer is it takes 4 to 6 years to roll out a corporate culture change worldwide in a company as big as Coca-Cola that does business in 102 countries. And so it can be a mismatch between changing the leadership and implementing a corporate culture change. And authenticity is part of that. But I will admit I have not done a deep dive in the research literature around relating what the question was, relating authenticity to whatever it was. I've already lost the question, but.
Okay, thank you for answering. The next question is, how deep do you go when terminating based on accountability?
I guess that means how deep down on the organization chart. Well, it depends on who is violating the accountability issues. So we can build that into our performance review system. We can build it into our budgeting review system. There are different ways that accountability is assessed. Jack Phillips wrote an excellent book on accountability, by the way, that I would strongly recommend for people to look at. Phillips, of course, is mainly known for his work on training evaluation, but he also wrote a book on accountability, and it is a problem. So we would go down to the lowest levels. If people have been assigned responsibility, they must also be accountable for what they do. And if they don't live up to agreements, then we have to decide what we are realistically willing to do and how important that violation is to the organization's success. I run into this a lot around succession planning, where the CEO will set certain targets for succession, but then a lot of managers do not want to groom their replacements because they are worried that they might be replaced with cheaper talent. So how do we hold managers accountable in a situation like that? Well, there are many ways. We can tie it to their pay raises. We can tie it to their job description requirements. We can tie it to the key performance indicators on their performance reviews. If we're in government, some of those methods may not work because of civil service protections, even for certain management levels, or union protections. But there are other ways we can get at it. In government, the popular way is to tie managerial performance to the budget for that department. No manager wants to see their budget whacked as a result of their bad behavior. You'll recall recently that Leonard Nadler, the senator, said that the way he was going to hold Attorney General Barr responsible was by cutting the budget of the Attorney General of the United States by $50 million. We can use the department budget as a way to hold people accountable, and then insist the manager still gets the results that we've hired them to do. Otherwise, it is a performance problem. So, other questions?
Yes, there's one more question. What if employees have different expectations of levels of transparency?
That's a great question, and I think that's an issue that we have to identify. We have to work that out. We have to identify that. That's why a lot of organizations do regular surveys, employee engagement surveys, to find out whether people believe that the communication processes are adequate. There's something called the communication audit. Whole books have been written about it, where we can come in and survey the workers and the managers about whether the level of communication matches up to people's expectations. And when it doesn't, we can identify that by survey or through interviews or focus groups, and we can then mount an action plan to address those and roll it down by level on the organization chart. So what do? Well, first we have to identify what are those different expectations. And then we have to involve the different key groups that have those different expectations in coming up with action plans to narrow those gaps.
We have another question that talks about, what are your thoughts on anonymous feedback platforms within an organization?
Well, generally I like them, but I realize they can be abused. And we, especially today, where people have gotten accustomed to what's the term? I'm forgetting it. Where they give you terrible feedback. Well, there's a term for that. But anyway, the point is, people may give personal insults. They may use swear words. They may lie in anonymous platforms. They may spread rumors that are completely untrue and that have no basis in fact. We've seen all of those tricks used recently in the political environment, and they've carried over into businesses and organizations, and people will sometimes use anonymous platforms to get revenge on people they don't like, including senior leaders, use it to get revenge on their bosses. And so I would say that we cannot just rely without checking. Trust but verify is a good phrase. And I would say that's something worth considering when we do anonymous data gathering through surveys or other methods.
Great, thank you. The next question is, are there any particular strategies that management or executive leadership can use to keep employees feeling confident and motivated if a change or decision-making process is taking much longer than expected?
Well, I think that's a great question, and that's one of the arguments in favor of using steering committees and committee task forces and involving representatives from every key level on the org chart and every department. I love that dream team approach where we pull in a representative of each level on the org chart and of each function in the organization, limiting it to no more than 12, but the ideal size is about 7 people, we know from research, and involve the people in coming up with the proposals for action. And when managers say, oh, that'll take too long, well, there are technology platforms that can make that happen fast. You can even do group decision making in a ballroom with 5,000 people using cell phones and surface ideas and get a multi-vote within an hour. So we should never use the length of time it takes to reach decisions by involving people as an excuse for authoritarian methods, because that is not an adequate excuse. It just means the manager doesn't know how to do it. So that's what I would recommend. Involve people in the decision-making process, and then make sure that they're communicating with their peer group about what's going on. Why is it taking so long to reach these key decisions? If one of our group, a representative from our department or level on the organization chart, is represented in the group making the decision, or at least coming up with the proposal for the decision, then that person is an ideal communicator with people at their own level and in their own silo. So we can work with that kind of approach to help deal with that mismatch between people wanting to know what the answer is and it taking a long time to get an answer, and then worry that we aren't getting communicated with when the answer does come. So we have to consider all of those. Incidentally, it's wise to come up with a communication strategy for every organizational change effort that is just as detailed as the implementation plan for the change project. We also want a communication plan that's equally detailed on who we will talk to, what we will say, when we will say it, where we will say it, how we will say it, and how we'll know that the message got across, step by step. Okay, next question.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more. So we'll go with, what if employees have different expectations of levels of transparency, feeling entitled to lengthy explanations that may be beyond their pay grade?
Well, again, that to me, that goes to the communication strategy. I mentioned the communication audit as one way to check what those expectation levels are. Another way to deal with it is to create those committees that I was talking about that represent different levels and different silos on the organization chart, and involve people in that decision-making process so that they get that. If they want a detailed explanation, it's a venue for them to explore that without holding up the train of action. So we want both. We want speed, but we also want decisions made in a timely way that are also well communicated to the organization. It's tough. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to thank Dr. Rothwell for sharing his knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to send us an email, which you can find on your screen. Dr. Rothwell, if you don't mind pushing that next slide for us.
I will, but it turns out I have to shut the chat box to do it.
Perfect, thank you. On behalf of our OD&C program, we hope you found this webinar helpful. Registration for all other events can be found on our social media platforms. And please feel free to visit our website on your screen or email us with any questions. Thank you all again for attending today, and we hope to have you back on July 31st from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. Please feel free to share a webinar series with your networks and social media platforms, as all are invited and welcome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.